Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shannon Full. I'm the new president of the Fargo Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, and want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're really excited as this is our third edition and section of of this series, and we've got one more left tomorrow. So the Legislative Preview Summit has been very well attended. We've gotten really great responses from it. So tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. is when we have our federal discussion. So if you have the opportunity to join us, you can use this same link and join us there. I'm really excited for the discussion today. Many of you may know I just took this role over 3 weeks ago, but come with 21 years of experience in leading chambers of commerce all over the Midwest. Most recently was in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region with the Twin West Chamber and the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. So I see some familiar faces as well as have a good understanding of some of the issues that we'll be talking about today. But nevertheless, we're really proud of the advocacy work that we do here at the Fargo Moorhead West Fargo Chamber. I was just talking with our senators and representatives about how critical it is for us to work together as a region, both in Moorhead, in Fargo, and in West Fargo, because we're very dependent upon the economies of those three cities and even our surrounding cities together. So we're excited to work, as we said, in both states, so both sides of the border, both sides of the aisle, and really looking forward to a future of continuing the great legacy work that we've been doing with the partnership that we have with our delegation. So thank you to our Public Policy Committee sponsors. As you all know, sponsorships are a critical piece of chambers of commerce all over the country. That is not any different for us. So our sponsors that are bringing the event to you today are AE2S, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Dakota, Bremer Bank, First International Bank and Trust, Moore Engineering, and Sanford Health. And then our presenting sponsor is Primacy Strategy Group. Primacy is a phenomenal organization that we've been able to have the great privilege in partnering with. And as the presenting sponsor of the summit, Primacy is going to moderate each of the sessions. So thank you to Primacy for the great collaboration. You can learn more about the work that they do on our chamber website, FMWFchamber.com. And so now enough from me. At this time, I want to welcome our moderator for this afternoon session, the Minnesota Policy Session panel, Kurt Zeller. So Kurt is the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs for PSG. He has served the Minnesota House of Representatives from 2003 to 2015, including Minnesota's 57th Speaker of the House. Kurt, thank you for your continued partnership. We really look forward to your moderating this today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you for the opportunity. I really want to thank the legislators and Speaker Kelleher, Commissioner Kelleher. I always go with the proper title. But thank you, Commissioner Kelleher, as well. You know, these folks have been in special session, regular session, extra session, and at the Capitol during something that none of them ever thought that they would have to face, a 100-year pandemic. And public service is always just that, public service. So I want to thank both Representative Margaret, Senator Eakin, and Commissioner Kelleher for your public service. We're all indebted to you for taking the time out of your workday, taking the time out of your private sector lives to serve in public office. So as always, thank you for that. As mentioned earlier this week, we were proud to be a presenting sponsor of the summit. It fits right in with the work that we do at Primacy Strategy Group here in Minnesota, in North Dakota, and then across the region. And as Shannon mentioned, you can check some of that work out, some of our case studies, look at our team on our website at www.primacysg.com. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today, not just because I get a chance to talk with some friends that I've been in politics for quite some time, but really dig into the issues that are going to be coming up this legislative session. And then as the region has changed, and welcoming Shannon, and I can speak on her behalf as a former Twin West Chamber member, the Fargo Moorhead West Fargo Chamber is really going to have a great advocate for the business community in Northwest Minnesota. So, and as just as a note too, we want to again thank Commissioner Kelleher. As you all probably saw the news earlier, Governor Walz was making some announcement about the COVID-19 episode here in Minnesota. So obviously not able to join us because he just probably still answering questions from the media. So we again want to thank Commissioner Kelleher. If you have any questions, again, as Shannon mentioned, please put them in the question and answer box. It'll be at the bottom of your screen. Put those questions in there, and then we'll get to those questions after some of the prepared questions that focus around a lot of the public policy things that you would expect a business group and you'd expect from legislators as we're getting in. So as we get into our panel, I'd like to first introduce Commissioner Margaret Anderson Kelleher to share some brief remarks. Margaret was appointed Commissioner of the Department of Transportation in 2018 by then Governor Tim Walz. Prior to that role, she served 12 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives, as we call it, the upper body, while she was elected and for Speaker of the House for 4 years. And while in the House, she served both on transportation policy and finance for 10 years. And prior to that, she was the CEO and president of the Minnesota High Tech Association. Please help me welcome my friend, Commissioner Margaret Anderson Kelleher.
Well, thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That never gets old. I have to say, the folks probably are wondering what's going on, but all the legislators know that that is a title that is very near and dear to our hearts, and we wear it with pride and honor for our entire life. So I am delighted to be with you today. Thank you for asking me. I'm happy to be the pinch hitter here for Commissioner Grove. And we might talk about a few different things though with me here. So I want to also just say congratulations to Shannon. I've known Shannon for a long time. I represented the west side of Minneapolis in the legislature, and we had a lot of common issues that we worked on in my time at the Minnesota High Tech Association as well. I also want to greet the legislators, Senator Eakin, Representative Margaret, and Representative-elect Keeler, and I'm looking forward to getting to know her as well. I'm going to keep it brief, but I have a few things I want to share with you about MnDOT and about the time of COVID, which I think is important. First of all, what a year it's been. I don't think any of us could have ever foreseen that at this time last year, we would be having a year like 2020. And so there's been so many challenges. I just commend all of you for both your work as employers, as your work in the community, because I know that goes hand in hand. At MnDOT, like all other organizations, this has been really an important year for us to re-examine everything we're doing, also our priorities and how they fit into the goals of Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan in terms of One Minnesota. And those goals remain. And you'll see these priorities throughout the work that MnDOT is doing. We obviously have our number one goal being our preservation of a great transportation system. Our second is safety. And then we have been working really actively on the issues around sustainability, climate resilience. You know something about that in the northwest part of the state with the amount of flooding that has happened, the idea that our infrastructure needs to be resilient. It needs to really hold up to what is happening in our world right now. We also have a focus on innovation, new technologies, and equity, both inside our work at MnDOT and how we are interacting with communities across the state of Minnesota. So like many employers, we were suddenly thrust into a world where over half of our 5,000 employees were asked to work from home for a period of time. We are now over half being back reporting to their workstation. And of course, we had a number of people who really could never work from home. We were still in snow and ice season when COVID hit. And we are now going back into snow and ice season, as you are well aware. And the folks who go out and plow the roads and make sure the ice is off the roads, they can't work from home. And so this has been a really, I would say, interesting, in the best sense of the word, challenge as leaders to be able to get through. And I'm proud to say that we are getting through it. In this winter season, we have plans that include for a lot of contingencies. We always have contingent planning going on, but this time around, we have to be ready if any particular truck station goes down across our system. And for that, we are calling on our internal MnDOT employees who hold those CDLs. I always assure everyone, I do not have a CDL. I will not be plowing your snow, and that's good for you. But we have a lot of people who do. And then we also are going to call on our fellow agencies potentially in some areas. The DNR actually has a high number of CDLs, and they may come into play with us. We also will be looking in some situations, if needed, for mutual aid from local communities. And you have such great local communities that I know that we can get this done together. I mean, our goal is to not have that happen, but I know people are very interested in that plan. And we've been working, I will just say the maintenance and operations area, MnDOT, has been working on that plan since late May to get it ready. I also just want to share that in the greater Moorhead area, over the next 10 years, we have about $200 million in projects planned. And some of the examples are in 2025, the Trunk Highway 75 reconstruction. In 2026, US 10, there's going to be a large project. Again in 2027, 2029, US 10, 2030, the I-94 reconstruct, which will be a big project that we will face. Of course, one of the big projects that we've all been working on together, Senator Eakin, Representative Margaret, and all of your local leaders, is the 11th Street Underpass in Moorhead. And we were successful in receiving a capital investment line item for rail grade separation. And we are excited that we're going to be able to really get into the design of the project now. So that'll be now through 2023. The projected construction is 2024 to 25. And the estimated cost is somewhere between 80 and 87 million. This project is actually using, and I think you'll find this interesting, it's using one of our newer techniques called construction manager, general contractor contracting. It allows us to bring the contractor on earlier. It'll help us identify innovations, reduce impacts, identify any unknown impacts much sooner, and minimize costs. It'll also help us coordinate with the railroads, which is really critical here. This was a tool that the legislature has allowed us to use in a limited form. It's one of the things we'll be hopefully looking to expand because these contracting tools are so critical for being able to deliver projects to the public much faster. I think I might stop there. We could talk about snow fencing. We've had some really great participation with local landowners and the snow fencing along 94 and Trunk Highway 10. The one thing I want to tell you about that, in 2019, we saw recorded crashes reduced by 90% where we have that new snow fence. So that's a win-win right there. And we're going to keep working on these issues. They can be fairly low cost, but high impact. So I know we'll talk about the budget in just a little bit and the effect it's had on transportation and what might be coming forward. But Kurt, I want to thank you and thank the members of the chamber for having me here today. And I look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And you actually got right into the first topic. So I'm going to check off on behalf of my relatives, mother and father-in-law, Highway 10 work will continue. That was actually one of my questions. And really appreciate the detail, the level of detail in that, because that is at a $1.9 billion bonding bill. For those that aren't familiar with the legislature, that is a very big lift. So that was a big project. So fantastic doing that. The one thing, and you got into a little bit of this, but during this whole COVID pandemic, we've all learned to do things differently. Our kids learn differently. We work differently from home. So is there anything that you've noticed from MnDOT's standpoint, whether it's practices, whether it's personnel, or just in practice, that has changed that you think going forward might be a permanent change?
Well, it's a great question. And we actually have a number of things that we're tracking. We set up an innovation committee right away that's multidisciplinary within MnDOT to kind of capture what the changes have been and where the changes are things that we think we can continue on going forward. I'll give you a very simple thing that changed right away. One of the biggest things in the construction industry is the sign off of the engineer on the plans. And MnDOT generally has done that with a live person signing the document. We have now moved to an e-sign document system. The great thing about that is that it kept all of our projects on track. We did not stop. We did not lose a single project in this construction season, either because of money or other types of barriers, like we couldn't get the documents signed. Yeah. And I want to tell you that's not true in every state. Many of the other CEOs of DOTs around the country had very serious financial issues going on in their states and had to cancel lettings, had to delay projects. We have not had to do that. And I'm proud of our team for that. But we actually have this committee and we are right now tracking the innovations, being able to see what things can continue on and go forward. So it's a great question. I hope all organizations are doing this. We all on this, Heather, I'm sorry about this, but I can't say this about you because I didn't work with you at the time, but the other four of us went through some big crises together. We went through some big budget crises. We went through the bridge falling down in Minneapolis together, major floods. And out of each of those things, you find the silver linings that you can bring forward and make change on. And I just want to say that I think it's an important part of our grit and our ingenuity in the state to be able to do that.
That's fantastic. I mean, that is the resilience of our prairie populism, right? As we, no matter how bad it is, there's something we can learn from it. So I agree, and I know businesses had to do the same thing. So I know as a chamber member, I'm sure that'll be welcome news that we're adapting, we're changing, and as businesses find that maybe it is okay for 30% of our workforce to work remotely, those changes will come. And we're going to eventually, I think we've heard about 1,000 times in the last week, the light at the end of the tunnel is there and getting brighter. But as we do get back to a semblance of normalcy, that will be great to learn from some of these things so that we can make improvements. So if you don't mind, Commissioner, since we are waiting for Representative-elect to come on, she had a previous commitment, so she's going to join us right around 4 o'clock. So if it's okay, I may ask you some of these budgetary questions. I can't help it. I mean, if you put together one budget, you put together a dozen of them, right? So I may ask for, never wanting to put you on the spot of, asking something that the boss hasn't said yet or the governor hasn't come out with. But as we go into some of these questions, I may just ask you to interject, and especially on transportation. I know the number of road miles, the amount of gas that we've all used has gone down. So the gas tax revenues are probably off a little bit. So I may, as we get to transportation, just probe that subject with you as well, because that may come to a policy change. So I'll bring in the other folks on our panel. And again, good friends to both Speaker Kelleher and I. We, especially from a budgetary standpoint, we're not gonna bore everybody with the tax committee discussion that Paul and Kent and I could go into with Margaret, but we will get into the budget. So please help me welcome now Senator Kent Eakin to the panel. He represents District 4. So he was first elected in the House in 2002 and then elected to the Senate in 2012, where he served since. Senator Eakin is the ranking minority member on the Family Care and Aging Committee. Please help me welcome Senator Eakin. Hey, there he is. Welcome, Senator. Next, help me welcome my good friend, Representative Paul Marquardt, who represents District 4B. So that's the Detroit Lakes area, Dilworth, not neck of the woods. Representative Marquardt was elected in 2000 and currently serves as the chairman of the House Tax Committee. Please help me welcome Representative Marquardt to the panel.
Thank you.
There he is, right from the classroom. And as I said, Representative-elect Heather Keeler, who was also elected just this last November, serves in District 4A. She'll be joining us a little bit closer to 4. And as she joins us, we'll just put her right into the question and answer period. So although COVID and, like I said, the press conference with the governor today is top of mind, I want to hold that subject so that Representative-elect Keeler can also be a part of it. So I'm going to jump right into the budget. And again, this is for Senator Eakin, Marquardt, and Commissioner Kelleher. It's familiar ground. So I'd like to start with that and start with Representative Marquardt. As we all know, all funding has to start in the House. So we're going to start with you. This, for those that don't know, the 2021 legislative session is where our biennial budget is passed and then signed into law by the governor. So Representative Marquardt, you've had a little bit of time, and thankfully we were looking at a budget deficit earlier this year, and now there's just a little bit of a surplus, and we'll wait until February to see how much that actually materializes. But what will be some of those priorities for yourself, for the House Tax Committee, but for House Democrats going into this next legislative session?
So, well, thank you so much, Speaker Zellers, and it's good to see two of the former speakers that I worked with, Speaker Zellers and Speaker Kelleher here. So I got to really watch my manners here with the two speakers. But I have to say that Speaker Kelleher was Speaker for 4 years, and then Speaker Zellers for 2 years consecutively there.
Yeah.
And those were some really tough budget times. And in fact, I think in 11, we came in with almost a $6 billion budget deficit. And the important thing is, and you guys were the leaders, is that even though we had these really difficult times, what you did is you were able to continue Minnesota on the path of keeping Minnesota the excellent state that is. So, I mean, under different leadership, it might have been different, but you kept us on a positive path despite all the obstacles. So thank you for that. I also want to thank the Fargo-Moorhead Chamber for organizing this event. So talking about the budget, and I do disagree with you, Speaker Zellers, when you said you wouldn't bore people with the tax things. Nothing is ever boring on taxes, and you know that because you served on the tax committee for many years. And when you have people like Representative Rukavina and others on that committee, you know it's always going to be interesting.
Yes.
So as you mentioned, this year is really the one thing we really need to do is it's to balance the budget. And we did get some better news based on what we had heard back in May when people didn't quite know for sure how everything was going to affect, or COVID-19 was going to affect things. But we do have now in the November forecast a surplus for this budget, which is very good. And so that allowed us to do business relief and some of the other things I know we can talk about later. Moving into the future, we're still looking at a $1.3 billion deficit into the 22-23 biennium budget. That's what we're here to do this year, starting in July 1 for the next 2 years, working on that budget. And just some premise that I'm hoping we can do, and I know politics might force us to do other things, but I'm hoping into this next biennium that the budget we set is structurally sound. And that means at all costs, try to avoid taking one-time money or shifts or that. And I know ultimately with politics, we may end up doing those type of things, but I think we have to start out with the premise that we've got to look at keeping our budget structurally sound, because if we don't match revenues with expenditures, it leads us to these constant, we're always behind the eight balls, always facing these budget deficits. And when that happens, you get cuts to important areas in rural Minnesota, local government aid, or possibly to our nursing homes, or you end up freezing education, all those type of things that impact us. So, I mean, I think everything should be on the table. Spending cuts, spending efficiencies, and also spending revenues should all be on the table to avoid the kind of the poor practice of one-time use of money and shifts. So, I mean, I'm hoping we can start out at least with that premise. At the end, I know politics comes in and you end up doing some of those things potentially. So the goals, first of all, is going to be COVID-19. You know, I think it's going to be very, very important. I mean, one thing we found out about COVID-19, it's not treating everyone equally economically. I mean, everyone's impacted health-wise, probably, or knows someone who's had COVID-19 or someone they've lost and so forth. But economically, it's been very unequal, where you've got some folks and businesses doing well and others that are really being hit hard. We've got to make sure that we help those individuals and businesses that are hit the hardest. And a lot of that is going to be retraining people who are in the low tech, more face-to-face service type of jobs, that those jobs are, where they were going to be kind of already transitioning out over 10 or 20 years. It's happened right now. We've got to make sure we can retrain those folks. And we also have to help businesses not only get across the bridge here, but into the future. A lot of businesses are going to have to retrofit into the new normal. Maybe they've got to do more for takeout or expand their business to create more space or whatever that might be. We got to look at that. And then it's, certainly going to be education and healthcare, how to keep the quality of life. So I know we'll come back to some of this later, but it's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt about it, but I'm looking forward to it.
Right. And Senator Egan, as Chairman Marquardt pointed out, the budget continues on, just like Commissioner Kelleher. Winter will continue even if we have a pandemic. So there are other areas of the budget that are going to continue. Obviously, we'll get into a little bit of healthcare and how some of the rural hospitals and clinics in your areas have been affected. But what do you see the priorities coming from the Senate? In full disclosure, for those that maybe don't pay as close of attention, Chairman Marquardt is in the majority in the DFL in the House. Senator Egan, the Republican majority in the Senate. So maybe don't have the budgetary requirements as a chairman, but still priorities coming from your caucus. What have been some of the discussions, and how are you guys leading into session?
Well, thank you, Kurt, and I appreciate it. And Mr. and Madam Speaker, I served under both speakers as well, and I have fond memories from those days. And I ended up having to leave the House. Paul Marquardt and I were put in the same district together during the last redistricting. So one of us had to go, and I couldn't dig up enough dirt on Paul, so I had to find someplace else to go. But I agree with Paul on a lot of the things that he had said about making sure that we get a structurally sound budget. I think that that's critically important. I think that we also need to make sure that we're maintaining a strong partnership with the business community, make sure that we're providing the services and the education and the training necessary to ensure that our economy continues to flourish in the future, and to get through these difficult times. I mean, the top priority, obviously, is going to be the pandemic and COVID-19 and dealing with all the fallout that's occurred as a result of that. And so first and foremost, doing all that we can to help our businesses survive, and to help our children, again, get the education they need. That's been, I think, greatly compromised too as a result of what's been happening recently. But we need to continue making investments in certain areas, even though we're facing an economic deficit in the next biennium. One of those areas is border-to-border broadband, for instance, and COVID-19 has really highlighted the disparities that exist and how important broadband services are in our communities and our communities' ability to survive. So I think that we need to make sure as we move forward. Yes, I agree with Paul that we're going to have to look at cuts and spending efficiencies as well as revenue. I don't think there's a silver bullet that's going to solve this problem. But even while we're looking at cuts, there are certain areas where we need to expand investments, like border-to-border broadband, and that's going to save us money in the long run. I like to point out that during the Great Depression, that was the greatest economic tragedy or disaster that we've had in our country's history. But there were still certain things that we found money to invest in, including the Rural Electric Association, which I think is very similar to border-to-border broadband. And that not only, it helped to bring us out of the Great Depression and created jobs and hooked up our rural communities. We can do the same thing here. It'll strengthen our economy in the long run. So things like that still need to be done. Of course, protecting funding for some of those critical services. I've always been concerned about our most vulnerable citizens, those in our nursing homes, long-term care facilities, those with disabilities. Unfortunately, during economic hardship, when the state's not taking in as much revenue, Health and Human Services seems to be one of the first areas of the budget that's looked at for cuts. And I know some people say, well, you know, it's the fastest growing area of the budget, and that's true, and it's one of the biggest areas of the budget, but there's a reason for that, and that's because the demands for these types of services are growing, because our population is aging, our people are living longer, and so we need to make sure that we're protecting those very important interests in our society. Other issues, I mean, child care assistance, which is critically important, not just for those who need child care, but also for the businesses who need workers who need those child care services. So that's another priority I think we need to focus on. For me, property tax relief, because it does hit rural areas harder, and it hits lower and middle income people harder. Also, I think focusing on the disparities in the border communities, I think we need to focus on things like the building codes, and not just even on the borders, but I think more generally dealing with regulatory issues, where I feel that regulations are often written from the perspective of the metropolitan area, because, I mean, let's face it, they have the population, they dominate the discussions, and usually policies are written from that perspective. And it's a one-size-fits-all policy type of approach that doesn't fit in many of our greater Minnesota communities, and especially not on the borders, where we have such a disparity in the regulatory environments between the two communities. And I think that we do go too far often in our state in the area of regulation. I think that we can do a lot to reduce the regulatory burden and still maintain the safe communities that we're seeking to have.
Sure. Well, I would not be a good friend if I didn't give Commissioner Kelleher an opportunity to lobby for a bigger chunk of the transportation budget. So Commissioner Kelleher, here's your moment to get
Well,
10% increase out of Chair Marquardt.
so I think that would be a bit premature at this point in the process, but I can share with you that I do think the governor and lieutenant governor, of course, share a lot of these very same values about having, you know, we constitutionally need to balance the budget. And so that is a requirement, but doing it in a way that is fair across the state is a really big challenge at times. And so I know the governor is looking for that fairness in the budget that he proposes, especially what both Representative Marquardt and Senator Eakin talked about. Businesses, especially service businesses, have been hit incredibly hard right now. And I think that the idea that things will return to pre-pandemic times easily is probably not where we're going to be. We're going to need to do some more work on this. And so that's a huge priority. I will take the opportunity to tell you that in the long term, transportation does need more funding. The question will be, is it an issue that we tackle in this session? A lot of times transportation is an issue, and fair enough, I've sat in the other seat. I understand how it goes. We are a long-term issue of investment. Although I do think we are part of rebuilding in the recovery and rebuilding better. And so another part of any sort of economic recovery is more that highway heavy construction, and being able to work together with the federal government, because I know the Biden administration, as it comes into office, is looking to do a pretty sizable investment in transportation and transit across the state. And MnDOT, of course, has responsibility for Greater Minnesota Transit, which is a critical need, a lot like childcare, where we need to make sure these services are available for people. And so that is a partnership that we need to be working on together. So the bonding bill was great. We're going to put that money to good work. It was really a capital investment transportation bill, but it was debt financed. And I don't need to remind everyone on this call that debt financing is not necessarily sustainable. It's one of the places that MnDOT is approaching, and we have a policy that the legislature actually, when I was there, helped establish, which was 20% of our revenue beyond 20% of our revenue can't go toward debt. We don't get our debt financed in the capital investment bill in the same way that general obligation bonds get paid off. So we have to take that out of the Highway User Trust Fund and pay the debt. And we're going to approach 17% here soon. And so that only leaves us a little bit of room to continue to use debt as our tool to invest in our system. Plus, that has restrictions. You all know that trunk highway debt can't be used on the local system. That trunk highway debt can't be used in ways to help people be able to, except in very special circumstances, use other modes of transportation like biking and walking, which we see a great demand for. So we're going to need to work on this together. I have to say I am a strong advocate for more funding. I just also know that our state is in a crisis, and when we're in a crisis, we need to be team players together.
Well, I appreciate that, especially as you said, and it leads perfectly into my next question, which all of you have already touched on, but something that I worked on as a metro legislator, but from a rural area. The border city aid and former Mayor Lanning, you all remember affectionately, worked on this just day and night. And so I want to give you the opportunity to discuss that. Representative Margaret and Speaker Kelleher, I think it passed for the first time under your leadership. And I know it's been a tremendous aid to businesses on the Moorhead side, and Moorhead could be East Grand Forks, could be, the Waupun and Breckenridge area as well. But do you see, and I'll start with you, Chair Marquardt, and do you see any proposed increases in the border city enterprise zone aid, or was that maybe a part of the special session bill that recently passed, so that might not necessarily be included in the new biennial budget?
Yeah, very important topic and area for Fargo Moorhead area and along the border. But in the 2019 session, we did make some improvements in the border cities program, is that we're able to make it permanent, a standing appropriation, where before what would happen is it'd be funded on a 2-year basis. And I remember over 1 2 years period, it didn't get funded. So these cities, never could really predict and know what they're going to have. So one of the big things we were able to do in 2019 is we set it at an annual amount of $750,000, but that would be now every year. So now they can count in budget. So that's really big. But, this is a tough issue. You always hear about certainly the tax difference between North Dakota and Minnesota. I mean, North Dakota's top tax rate is 2.9%. Minnesota's 9.85%. So, people say, well, why can't you match North Dakota? We're not going to match North Dakota. I mean, Minnesota has always been a high tax, high service, and actually high quality service state. And, we've always used the vast amount of our budget, as 50% goes through college education. And that is to produce one of the best trained workforces in the nation. And so that's always been a strength and high quality of life and so forth. But having said all of that, you have to be cognizant of the fact that there is this tax difference. And so that's why, we try to make sure we're using these dollars efficiently to have good services. But as Senator Eakin mentioned, that's also why I think it's really important we keep property taxes low. Now, the city of Moorhead always kind of does a comparison between Fargo and Moorhead, and they look at an average house value, an average so forth, and what are all the taxes, utility, and whatever. And years ago, it used to be very close because Minnesota was quite a bit lower on property taxes. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, North Dakota put a lot of money, general fund money, to buy down property taxes on the education side. And so that benefit isn't quite what it used to be. But so we have to be very cognizant. And that's why this border cities is important, because it is part of trying to recognize that taxes and just a lot of things you know, have to be a player in all this, and you've got to try to level things. You know, workers' comp is another one, and these border city dollars can go towards workers' comps for cities to help buy that down for businesses. So, so anyway, it's an important issue, and I don't know if there's going to be anything new other than maybe there's some things, as Senator Eakin mentioned, on building codes or regulations that you could, since you already have an existing kind of template with a border cities program, that you could plug that into that.
Yeah, well, and Senator Eakin, it leads right into you know, kind of the twin pillar for greater Minnesota communities, especially, you know, here in the Moorhead area, but, you know, could be Dilworth, could be Pelican Rapids, Detroit Lakes, is the local government aid, or LGA, and, you know, a lifeline to a lot of rural communities. You know, do you see any changes coming on, you know, the Senate side, or, you know, if you've in talks with the governor about his budget for either increases or changes in the LGA?
Well, I think whenever we're facing a deficit situation, that there's always a chance that we could see cuts in those areas. So I'm very concerned about that, because as you said, Kurt, it's the lifeblood of a lot of our communities in greater Minnesota. So we really need to be in defense mode, I guess, to try to protect the funding that we currently have for local government aid. I think that we should be expanding on, not cutting in those areas, because of how important it is. But it's an easy place to cut for some, because it's not a direct cut to people themselves. It's a cut to local governments that then have to make the tough decisions about what services to cut. That's one of the reasons that I think we need to really be vigilant in trying to protect this aid, is because it's an easy way to kind of shift the problem off onto somebody else. And we can't be doing that. And we need to make sure that we maintain a strong base of support for local government aid, because there are, you know, cities of the first class do receive local government aid. And there were attempts in the past to try to eliminate the local government aid for those cities, those large cities, saying that, well, that means then they could just spend it out on the rural. But the problem is, if you lose the base of support from those cities, it's only a matter of time before local government aid in total is gone. We need to make sure we maintain a strong base of support for that. Our rural communities depend on it so much more than any others. And I think that we can. I think that we can get bipartisan support on that, because you know, when it comes to some of the divisions within the legislature, it's often more geographic sometimes than it is partisan. I think this is one of those issues where a number of my Republican colleagues from the rural areas are also going to be strongly advocating for a strong LGA program. And so it gives me hope. And we do have the only split legislature in the nation, but we've been able to get things done. And I've actually been proud of that, proud to say that I'm from Minnesota, because we've had leaders who know how to work together to find the common ground and to get things done.
Yeah. Well, Speaker Kelleher, again, I'm going to take advantage of your legislative background too, because Senator Eakin really hit an important point, that LGA isn't just for small cities, you know, out in rural counties. It is really critical for cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, and maybe a little bit of background on this, just to give you know, our listeners up in this neck of the woods an idea of what that means for the communities in downtown. And then I know we're quickly running out of time, so I do want to get into the COVID, because I've had a couple of questions that pop up about that. So
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Keller. Just a little bit about that LGA formula on the Minneapolis side, you know, what it means to the business community downtown as well.
Well, and you all have seen business, the downtown business core is hurting in a huge way. And that started with COVID, when thousands of workers went home one day and didn't come back, and all the ripple effect that that's having, everything from commercial and industrial rentals to the folks who are in the skyways and on the streets selling food. That's all gone. And, you know, downtown Minneapolis, I live about 3/4 mile from downtown Minneapolis. I can easily walk there or bike there. It's really a different place right now because of the effect of COVID. We also have the other piece of what happened, and that is really the reaction to the murder of George Floyd in our city. And, really, I think important conversations going on around African-American community and policing, people of color and policing across our state. It is an important conversation, everyone. But it did have a really detrimental effect on the downtown. And so right now, things like local government aid, the aid that'll come from, that came from the CARES Act, Part 1, and now it looks like there will not be state and local aid in the second part of the CARES Act or HEROES Act. We're gonna have to wait on that. That, I think, is going to put more pressure on the legislature to keep up its local government aid to communities. The other piece of that is something that Representative Marquardt touched on, which is the property tax burden in the state. And, it is a three-legged stool on the front of the general taxes. And so we need to make sure that one of those does not get way out of line, because it really has a detrimental, that property tax burden has a huge effect on those on fixed incomes and low income Minnesotans. And I also just want to share one other thing that is unique in Minnesota with transportation, and that's how we share our transportation revenues. And that transportation revenue share, sometimes people don't realize that when you pay your penny of gas tax in, it is shared out with your counties and cities for the most part, other than cities under 5,000. And it's an issue we have to deal with in the future here. But cities and counties share in that revenue that you pay in that user fee. And we need to make sure that people know that, because that, again, like what Senator Eakin was saying, is a huge part, the formula and distribution of that is a huge part of the support for future transportation bills. And so, like I said, I don't know if that's going to happen this session or not, but anything that does happen always has to have that equity and fairness in its distribution as well.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. And as I can see on my screen, hopefully you all can see as well, we'd like to welcome Representative-elect Heather Keeler, who represents District 4A. Welcome to the panel and welcome to the legislature. I know you officially don't have an election certificate yet, but we'll just call you representative from now on, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, so we did hold off on the COVID thing. We were going to make this all about taxes and the commercial industrial tax base and how that is going to be affected. But we said, you know what, that may not be as exciting to the constituents. So we're going to continue on now with a few other topics. And one in particular that, obviously has been on the top of mind for everyone. In fact, it's been a while since I left the house, so I'm gonna have to put my cheaters on to read this question from one of the members. Something we've heard from the Moorhead area businesses in light of the recent special session in the COVID funding assistance for businesses. The first round of grants for Minnesota businesses had a residency requirement for our region, which operates as a bi-state metro, where many of Minnesota businesses who are precluded from applying as they live just across the river in North Dakota. So the business is in Moorhead, home is over in Fargo. Will the same requirements, and again, this is just fresh, so maybe we'll have Senator Eakin, as the upper body, take the question first, but will these same requirements implemented for the financial assistance that was just approved during the special session? And if so, is there potential for that to be changed at the beginning of the legislative session, so that if you are a business in Moorhead, you'll be able to get that relief? Because I believe the first round, they were not, and there were several Moorhead Chamber business members that were not able to qualify for those dollars.
Yeah, and it did. The requirement is still there, and I think that's unfortunate. We really should be looking at where the businesses are located, because the aid is going to help the business and to help those that are working in those businesses who are Minnesotans, that are working here. So, and it contributes greatly to our quality of life. So a loss of a business to Moorhead, it doesn't matter whether the owner lives in Moorhead or lives in Fargo, it's still a devastating blow to the community of Moorhead. So we need to push as hard as we can on that. And of course, there is always the chance, the opportunity that in the regular session we could address this. It's difficult. One of the challenges we face, of course, is that there are a number of legislators and people in the government who think, well, Minnesota aid should be for Minnesota citizens. And it's so trying to overcome that argument. And I think it'd be easier to overcome if the aid was sufficient, that everybody who wanted could get what they needed. But one of the things that I encountered, and I spoke with Commissioner Grove about this, I've spoken with other colleagues in the legislature about this, but they sometimes come back saying, well, there's only so much revenue to go around, and we got to cut it off someplace. So that's one of the issues that we're facing, and it's unfair to border communities like ours, because there are, and I'm sure Duluth and other border communities are experiencing the same problems here. It really, I think, puts our border communities again at a disadvantage. And I think we should be making an argument that all communities should be treated fairly. And this requirement, I think, treats border communities unfairly because it hamstrings some of our businesses that other communities don't see.
Right. Well, and Representative Marquardt, this fits a lot in with those border cities. This is something that was addressed more than 20 years ago, that there are disadvantages, whether intended or unintended, but is something that, it has happened, and it is affecting those local business owners. Have you heard this from some of your constituents? Maybe not the ones in the Dilworth area, but maybe, Detroit Lakes, some of that area, about some of the similar issues with this bill?
Well, I have, and I know the first part, there's really kind of three parts to this most recent business relief package we sent out. 88 million is going to those businesses that suffered a 30% loss from last year to this year. And I know that requirement that the owner has to be in Minnesota does apply. Now, there's about $114 million that go out to the counties, including almost 1.3 million that Clay County is going to get. And I don't know, Senator Eakin, maybe you know, but I know there are a lot less restrictions on those dollars that the counties can spend. You don't have to have the 30%, and it doesn't have to be just those impacted by Executive Order 20-99. And so
Right.
I don't know for sure. And I asked a number of questions to folks on the requirements, and that one I didn't ask. So I don't know if Senator Eakin knows, but it may not, this requirement may not apply, and the counties might have that discretion to give those dollars to businesses where the owner lives in North Dakota. I'd have to check on that, but there could be that possibility.
Yeah, that's great. Senator Eakin?
Yeah, I would have to check on that as well to be sure on that. But so that would be a great opportunity there for accessing funds. But
Right,
I think as far as moving forward, if to try to open it up, any future aid or any of the aid that's still, that's still being dispensed from what we've passed, if we can limit it to, contiguous counties or something of that nature, that's
Right.
one of the things that I've been talking to my colleagues about. So it's not just opened up to, owners from California or something. It's got to be people who live right next door. That should limit it to a degree where it shouldn't have a negative impact on the other Minnesota residents who have businesses.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. We don't want people from California or Texas, filing a claim, getting some money, and then not spending it in our communities. Well, Representative Keeler, again, welcome. And we won't ask you the details of this bill, but you've been on the campaign trail. You just were elected. Congratulations. And as I thanked Senator Eakin and Representative Marquardt and Commissioner Kelleher, thank you for taking public service. I know this is your first term, and hopefully you will continue. It won't be spoiled after 1 year down at the Capitol. But what have you heard from business owners as you were out on the campaign trail just recently? What have you heard from business owners in the Moorhead area or in the district area as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it goes all the way to just conversations in the last couple of days with a couple of our restaurant and bar owners. This is their livelihood, and we're a community that we really have to understand border city opportunities. And the opportunity is that we have 4 or 5 restaurants / bars here that can just pack up and move across the bridge and implement a business over there. And that really reflects on our extended livability here in Moorhead. I think we can all agree that we really want Moorhead to be a place that people want to move to and people want to live in and thrive in. And we really have to invest and hear those stories. And we have to really push for that regional decision making. As I've sat on other meetings with Senator Eakin, he talks a lot about, and Representative Morcourt, we talk a lot about this regional and community mind frame, that, you know, we have to speak up and be a voice for our border cities. And I know that our owners are really frustrated, and they're feeling like it might just be a better option to leave. And now with the extension of being closed, you know, into the new year, our businesses are feeling it. They're very stressed out and emotional because it is their livelihood. I think that I can say, you know, a lot of the restaurants and businesses that are here have been doing very good at safety protocols. You know, I love going and visiting places and eating locally, and I've seen the spacing, I've seen the safety protocols, and I just wish that there was a way that we had some capacity in our region and in our communities to maybe provide some better opportunities for our businesses here. I will add, the other business that I think we kind of forget is our daycares. You know, for us to be able to work, a lot of us have kids, and with, you know, kids being home from school, but the one thing that's a little bit disappointing, I guess, in this bill for me is that, you know, it's really going to be hard for our independently owned daycare providers, which is what we have in Clay County, a lot of, you know, for their relief and their supports, because we're already a community that's very short in daycare. And if we don't have daycare, that's the foundation of a lot of us having the ability to work.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, and it leads right into, as I said, you know, one of the major topics that's on everybody's mind, and, you know, some recent developments, you know, now that the Pfizer vaccine has been approved, and we've all seen on TV somewhere, somebody getting a shot, which only in 2020 is someone getting a shot, newsworthy at the top of the hour, but it is 2020, and it looks like Moderna will be approved or shortly be approved. So, you know, now that the vaccine has been approved and is being distributed, what role will the legislature play in educating Minnesotans on the safety of the vaccine? You know, we've heard a number of politicians. Some of the previous panels have asked, so I think it's probably a requirement of me that I ask if all of you will be taking the vaccine, you know, if available and in order. You know, if you're all very healthy and I don't think have any comorbidities. So if wherever you fall in that line of first, second, or third phase, well, what do you think the role of the state will be? And then again, will you guys be willing to take that shot when given? I should say, and I apologize, Representative Marquardt, let's start with you first. You're in a school, so you've got the you built up immunities as a school teacher, probably better than any of us, right?
So yes, I have, but no, certainly I will take the vaccine. I don't want to be first though. I mean, the first have to go out to those most vulnerable and those taking care of them. So whenever I'm in line, that's fine, but I will take it. But I do think it's going to be important for the state to get information out to folks. I mean, I think that's really important in all this. But I mean, what we have to remember is even though we can now see the light at the end of the tunnel, there is still a lot ahead of us on this. We're far from out of the woods. And, you know, as Heather brings up, I mean, we've got a lot of businesses and people who are hurting very much right at this point. And we've got to do whatever we can. I mean, there's this balancing act, you know, between the health, physical health and our economic health. And you know, I wish we would have gone to a more regional approach. I mean, a one size fits all doesn't always work. And I was hoping restaurants could be opened at least to some capacity. I mean, I think that was our hope. All of these are tough decisions, however, and you never know for sure how things are going to play out. But we've got to just make sure, because a lot of these businesses just simply aren't going to make it. I mean, I even with some of this help, I'm afraid some are not going to make it. And I talked to a number of restaurant and bar owners just in the last few days, as I have over the last 9 months. But you know, we've got the relief package right now, but really we also need the federal government to step in. They're the ones that can really provide the big relief, you know, the PPP and some of these things that really help a lot of businesses. they need to step forward, and I'm hoping they can put something together that will get out to our businesses and individuals and so forth, because people are in a tough way, and you talk with them and they're your friends and your neighbors, and some of them are without jobs, some are closing on their business, and it's just really tough. So that's the responsibility, information getting out to the public.
Yep.
But also we've got to be there as a state as best we can. You know, we still have to keep a balanced budget, but we've got to get people across this bridge. And I know a lot of people are going to think, well, the vaccine's here, we're going to be done in a couple of weeks and this is going to be over. But no, it is not. Could go on for a long, long time. And even knowing the vaccine was coming, even in our budget forecast in November, they said full employment would probably not be back until 2024. And even our GDP levels not back to early 2022. So, I mean, we're talking years out yet to fully recover from this.
Well, and Senator Eakin, Representative Marquardt led right into, you know, one of those struggles. And I've talked to a number of business owners up in your area about that regional approach. You know, there were months on end where your rural hospitals and clinics, you know, there was nobody there. You didn't have the caseload, and yet these poor facilities sat empty. And, you know, Senator, do you want to take an opportunity maybe to talk about what some of the governor's announcements today, and, you know, some of the restrictions, and just how you're hearing from those constituents that, you know, all the healthcare, the clinics, the hospitals are on the North Dakota side, and they're going over and they're staying for business or a meal, and it's really affecting your local economy. Do you want to share some comments about the governor's announcement earlier today?
Yeah, well, and I had wished that there'd been more lifting of the restrictions. I feel, and I wish that there'd be more of the regional approach, just as Representative Marquardt had mentioned, as well as you, Kurt, because we are a big state with a lot of diversity in it and a lot of diverse situations, different situations that need to be taken into account. And I already mentioned how dealing with regulations generally, we tend to see a one-size-fits-all approach. It just doesn't fit in greater Minnesota. And that's been one of my biggest frustrations serving in the legislature, is dealing with that and the fallout that has occurred in greater Minnesota as a result. So, and I've expressed these concerns directly with the governor, and we visited about it, and specifically talked about the border situation again. And I pointed out the fact that, you know, because the businesses were staying open in Fargo but closed in Moorhead, you had people that were simply just going across the river. So you're not getting any of the health benefits, but you're still getting all of the economic fallout and damage that's being done. And he indicated, I mean, he was receptive to that, understood what I was telling him was, and I think, you know, I'm hoping that in the future we can see an addressing of that regional concern, and especially with the borders, because of how dramatic the effect is there. The damage is much greater because, you know, the concern is not only losing business for that period of time across the border, but them developing a loyalty to those businesses on the other side of the border and not coming back again. That's a real concern. And so, you know, dealing with that, or dealing with the building codes, I think that's something that we really need to address this next session. We may not have a lot of money to deal with. We got a deficit to deal with, but, you know, dealing with building codes and other regulations, that's an area where we don't have to expend money, and it may actually save us money. And help our businesses out on the borders by balancing or leveling the playing field in the borders.
Well, and Representative Keeler, you already alluded to, you know, the first part of that question is, you know, like you said, a restaurant, there's an empty building across the river, and, you know, for those of us who grew up in the area know, you know, the drive from Moorhead to Fargo is only but a couple, 2 or 3 miles, and you're over the border, and pretty soon that restaurant, you know, as Senator Eakin stated, builds up a customer base, they build up a loyalty, and it's harder to get them back. So, you know, if you know, following up on that, any additional thoughts on, you know, how some ideas that you've heard from local businesses on how you at the legislature could be helpful to them in the next session?
Yeah, one of the things we've kind of tossed out is like a grading scale almost like, if we have people go in and really do thorough checks while our businesses are open and they're practicing safe distancing and they're doing all of the things that we're asking of them to maintain the healthy capacities, that, why can't we have a little give in this greater Minnesota and border city community when we are in this massive shutdown? Because Senator Eakin brings up a really good point that we've been talking about, is if we don't provide places for them to eat here, they're going to go over to the bigger community and then come back and share any exposure that they've had. And so I think that if you were an A-level business and practicing really safe distancing and your tables were separated and staff is wearing masks and being really responsible, why can't we have a couple hours that they're open over maybe their lunch or their dinners? But then also, like, as a consumer, I think some of us would maybe be able to feel more comfortable going to those places that have that scale or grade. But again, it's just really thinking outside the box on how do we do this. It's one thing to say, we want to have a regional approach, but what is that? What is the regional approach? What are some standards that we could help? What are ways that we can maintain the safety protocol for our businesses? But I want to touch on one other thing that we talked about to follow up with what Representative Moorhead said, was the fact that we need to get information out to the public about the vaccine. I would just add that when we do that, at the same time, it needs to be available in multiple languages. We have a high Somali and Kurdish and Spanish population, and we learned that at the very beginning of this pandemic, that our second languages were very much an afterthought. But then in our community, as our new American populations ended up having higher cases, they were kind of blamed for it. And the reality is that it's our responsibility as a community and a state to communicate effectively to all of our community members. So I would just kind of piggyback on that whatever we decide and whatever changes are being made, we need to make sure that language is a part of that for all of our community members.
Well, that's a great point. Minnesota has always been a melting pot, as our nation is, and we want to make it as welcoming and as understandable to everybody, because that really is going to be the key to helping us get back to normal. We just have a few minutes left, so I want to touch on something that Senator Eakin brought up, and so I'll start with you, Senator. Is those rural hospitals and clinics that really suffered. Some of these optional treatments or things that could wait were put off, and it really did affect a lot of those local communities. So do you see any aid being brought in the next legislative session, either financially or with relief, with some of those local clinics and hospitals that have really suffered through the early part of the pandemic, when there just really wasn't anybody occupying any of those areas?
Yeah, and I think that we may see some further assistance for our hospitals, especially those in the rural communities, as you said, which have suffered greatly. We did pass in the spring of the year. We did pass during the regular session about $200 million of assistance to healthcare facilities, to our hospitals and clinics, and it could be used for a variety of different purposes. And it gave discretion to the Commissioner of Health in dispersing some of those dollars so that they could be dispersed quickly to where there was needed, and have flexibility with that, whether it be personal protection equipment or testing or ventilators or more ICU beds or greater staffing. All of these are issues. So there's a multitude of different issues that they're contending with. And yes, I think we need to do all we can, especially to preserve the hospitals that we currently have, because access is such an issue for people in rural Minnesota. Just being able to get to a hospital that's not an hour drive away.
Right.
And we need to make sure we're doing all we can to save these critical access hospitals that are out there. And one other thing I was going to mention on I think one other part of healthcare that oftentimes is seen as kind of a second tier and not given as much consideration, but should be, is that of long-term care and the crisis that's being faced there. And they're taking care of the most vulnerable among us. And this is an area where we really need to double down and focus more of our efforts here, because that's where the vast majority of the deaths are occurring, and make sure that they have the staffing, that they have the testing, that they have all the resources that they need to protect our most vulnerable among us. And so I think there's going to be a lot more focus on that as we're moving forward as there should be. And by the way, you were asking about the vaccines. I will take the vaccine as well.
I
I'll wait
forgot to
my,
press you on.
I'll wait my turn in line. I'm not trying to get to the front at all. But I do think it's important that not only do we provide accurate information out there, but I do think we need to push back on the disinformation that's out there as well, because there is a lot of it. And it is important that we get this right, because if we don't get enough people to vaccinate, we're not going to develop that herd immunity that's so critical to stopping the spread of it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. We don't want to have 100 million Americans that say they're not going to take the test, and then this goes on for another year or a year and a half. And Representative Marquardt, quickly as we're finishing up, Detroit Lakes Hospital, I'm sure, has probably contacted you, not to put them on the spot, but some of the challenges that they've seen, and how do you see some of that aid coming forward in the next session?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a committee certainly that I work on specifically, but I mean, it's certainly going to be an issue that's going to have to be dealt with. But I want to mention one thing, if I could, divert here, if I could, Mr. Speaker.
Absolutely.
So one thing for employers, I think, and we've actually set up a committee this year in the House that is going to look at kind of these career academies that, every single high school senior before they leave high school should have some technical or vocational skill, plumber, welder, contractor, nursing, computer, whatever, apprenticeship, a 2-year degree, a certificate or something. And we've got to get our tech schools back together with our high schools, because that's going to be the game changer, I think, in moving into the new normal when we talk about after the post COVID-19. And so I think that might be beneficial for folks listening today, that we've actually got a committee looking at that, and that's something we absolutely have to do.
I totally agree. It's a trend nationally, and Minnesota should lead on this as well. Commissioner Kelleher, I just have to ask, I'm not sure if MnDOT will have a role to play in the distribution of the vaccines, but you will provide the roads and the the bridges for the vaccines to get to folks. So just want to give you an opportunity, if as we just close out here.
So the last mile is really important here in getting the vaccines distributed. And so obviously that's going to be a high priority, especially in light of snow and ice and where we are in the season. And so I think that's a very important piece of what our mission is. We also are going to be asked, I believe, in some regions, as right now it's, so focused on that 1A group, but as it starts to move out, there will be a need for other locations that are near to people. And I know that several, we've been identified, we have facilities across the state that could possibly be used for drive-in vaccines. And that has to be partnered with, you need to be monitored after you have the vaccine. Yes, I will get the vaccine. I want to tell you that I will get the vaccine after every single snowplow driver in the state has the vaccine who's going to take the vaccine, though, because I want to make sure that our transportation system is strong. I think the real goal, and I do not, the pain of these businesses is very real. Yeah. The goal here in this next phase is to try to start to really drive that curve down of what's happening with the contagion of COVID-19. Right. And it's trying to drive the vaccination rates up so that people are protected, because too often what we were seeing is that people do not live in bubbles, folks. We cannot, the folks who are going into the nursing homes, the folks that are going into the hospitals, they were bearing a brunt of exposure, and then that was a bad cycle for us. So yeah, it's a little bit longer. I hope we can work with the federal government and the state government to get more assistance to folks. I heard you today. I will bring back a number of the things I heard to the administration. I know I'm not the commissioner of DEED, but I do have a good hearing, and I heard you.
Well, and we appreciate that. If there's ever a voice of reason in the room, I say this sincerely, I would put you at the top of the list. And thank you. I was going to ask you about the snowplow drivers. I consider them essential, but I'm out on the road quite a bit. So Representative Keeler, we just want to, since you're the last one, we want to make sure, anything that you would like to discuss, any topics that you're going to be focused on, some of your priorities at the Capitol. We'll let you wrap up the session with what you're going to be doing in your first term down there and some of your priorities.
Yeah, I'll start by committing to the fact that I'm going to take the vaccine too, like everybody else has said. It will be when it's my turn.
Right.
I am healthy and I have the capability to work from home. And so I want to make sure that our communities are safe. That's always been a priority
Right.
of mine. Education is a real passion of mine. It's something that education played a huge role in my life, but also it's the professional field that I work in. So I really like what Paul talks about, and it really, to me, needs to expand into this braided roots type of a mind frame that we're intertwining our high schools, our community college, tribal schools, and higher ed, for bachelor's and master's degrees. And so there really is this really intertwining of all of that spaces, but so that our youth can really get out and be professionals, and do this in a world that is not building so much debt. I think a lot of us, when it comes to education, it's a fear of ours, because then we turn around and leave into the world and we have, $40 to $60 to $100,000 in debt. And we all know that that plays a huge impact on the capability to buy a house, to buy cars. And so we look at housing and affordability. When you're leaving with student loans, like it all just kind of piles up in a space. So education is a really big piece for me, especially coming from a community that has a community college, a private school, and a state school, but also making sure that we look all the way down to, our early childhood. We start to see the divide in health disparities, along with education disparities with our minority students as early, as 3 years old. And so just making sure that we really have an inclusive lens when it comes to education, housing, and quality healthcare for everybody. I think a lot of people say we want healthcare for everybody. I really want to push for quality and inclusive healthcare. You asked about it. One of the things that I would really like to see us invest in is that virtual medicine piece, so that we can do a lot of monitoring from home, but also from a mental health capacity, just making sure that we're able, this pandemic has really put a lot of strain on people's mental health, especially with our youth. So just making sure that we have that virtual medicine piece that doesn't go away. I think we've learned so well how to use our virtual spaces in this pandemic, that I want to make sure that we still have that capability going into the new world. I don't want to go back to the old normal, because that wasn't really working, but as we move into the new world with new opportunities.
Well, and I really thank you. The mental health part of this, and the things that are, and I have 2 teenagers, so I know exactly what you're talking about, how that has been trying on them. So I really appreciate that, and keeping that in the forefront. So I really want to thank Representative Keeler again. Congratulations. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to my good friend, Commissioner Anderson Kelleher, both Senator Eakin and Representative Marquardt. It was great to see you again. I may show up at tax committee just to hear, just to, make sure and be a part of the conversation, Representative Marquardt. But we want to thank you for the great conversation today. We really appreciate it. Thank you again for your public service. And just a reminder that tomorrow at 2 p.m., we will be having our 4th and our last panel. And this is a summit with Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota, Senator Hoeven from North Dakota, Congressman Armstrong from North Dakota, and then our newly elected Congresswoman Fishbach, who I think many of us also served with on this panel. And that will be, you just follow the same link here that you did to tune in today. That'll be at 2 p.m. tomorrow. So we encourage you to do it. Thank you to the Chamber. Thank you to Katie and Mason for all their work helping get this together. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. If you were unable to catch all of it, there will be a recording of this presentation posted on the Chamber website afterwards. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy holidays.
Thanks.
Thank you.